Hi everyone, my name is Pian Pian. I'm the founder and CEO of Amotions. Amotions helps you increase success and happiness by developing important skills such as communication, emotional intelligence, and leadership skills. We provide you with a supportive community for you to practice with and chances to learn from industry leaders and coaches. You can also access our high-quality content, daily exercises, and insights based on data analysis and AI so that you can grow yourself professionally and personally. Today, we're very excited to have Jeff here. Jeff is CEO of Apex Technology. He's also operating partner at Besema Ventures and former CFO of Oracle and various tech companies. He's also board member of Kaiser Permanente, Okta, former board member of Booking Holdings, and several other companies. Jeff, we're so excited and happy that you can join us today. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining in. And we'll do audience Q&A at the end as well.
Great to see everybody. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you. Jeff, I think your career has been a very inspiring one and very interesting one for the audience. I think you have been in management consulting as well as in investment banking before becoming CFO at various tech companies. Would you mind sharing, how did you navigate the career transitions after Yale and Stanford, and how did you progress in different industries to become leader in an industry?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you again for inviting me. And I know some people on this call are Yale alumni. I was Yale class of 1977 in Saybrook, went directly to Stanford Business School, and ended up on Wall Street working for the first Boston corporation, which is now Credit Suisse, doing media industry mergers and acquisitions. So what a number of people do after college or business school is they join what I call academy companies, like consulting firms, investment banks, at this point, probably Google and Facebook or companies like that, where they have great training programs. And early in your career, you get a chance to just learn the basics of business and a function like finance or marketing, things like that. And from First Boston, one of my clients was a television programming company called King World Productions, which did Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy, and the Oprah Winfrey Show. So it was a public company with 3 hit shows, and they had an accounting CFO and they wanted a Wall Street CFO. So I knew about the media industry, I knew about finance. I had never been a chief financial officer, but they took a chance on me, and because they knew me, they hired me to be the CFO of King World. I was 32 years old and the CFO of a New York Stock Exchange public company that was very profitable, and that was my big break to get that job. And then once you're a public company CFO, whenever any other company does a search for a public company CFO, you're on a list of potential candidates. So I got all my other CFO jobs after that.
That's amazing. Become CFO at a public company at 32 years old. What were the key things, like either hard work that you have done, results you have produced, or skills, personality traits that you think that contributed to your becoming CFO at such a young age?
Well, the personality trait, which I assume is common to most people at Yale, is I was always very curious. I just loved learning. And so I would constantly try to learn more about what the areas that I was focusing on, which for me was both an industry focus and a skill focus. So my first job out of business school was actually at Boston Consulting Group, working for a lot of different clients. I had some media clients, I had a chemical company client, I had a healthcare client, a trucking client, and I learned a little bit about a lot of things. And then I just, at some point in your career, it probably helps to focus, and I focused on media. So I learned a lot about the newspaper business, television business, things like that. So that was my industry focus early in my career. And then in terms of functions, if you think about all the functions in business, you could be engineering, product, marketing, sales, finance. I always liked math, and finance seemed like a better fit. I thought about sales at one point, but I think I was better analyst than I was a salesperson. And so I migrated to finance. So I think the opportunity for me, both at First Boston and at King World, was that I spent a lot of time, a lot of effort. I learned a lot about both the media industry and finance. And that really made me qualified.
So the key here I heard is curiosity, learned fast and learn a lot, and kind of putting in an effort to learn about different areas and fields that you were interested in.
Exactly. And there's a concept that people talk about, which is having a profile of a T from a learning point of view, which is, if you think about just visualizing a T, where it's a thin horizontal thing, and then it's deep in the middle. So you know a little bit about everything, and then you know a lot about one thing. And so I was very curious. So I tried to learn a lot about a lot of different things, but then I wanted to go very deep on finance and media.
That's amazing. I think we have more audience joining. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we'll take that for Jeff as well. Jeff, we also want to learn a little bit about, like, are there fun facts about you that you would like to share?
Well, you may have noticed that my name is Jeffrey Epstein. I know everyone's off video here, but put in chat, does everyone know who the other Jeffrey Epstein is? Just put something in chat, if yes or no. You know there's another Jeffrey Epstein out there? So one person, Dr. Kang, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, said yes. What have other people, have everybody else heard of the other Jeffrey Epstein? So it's a little unfortunate, because the other Jeffrey Epstein is a pedophile and was arrested and committed suicide. So it turns out that I've never met him, but we had mutual friends, and one of my friends is the CEO of a company, and about 20 years ago now, my wife got a phone call at home from an administrative assistant asking, when is my plane going to come to pick up this friend? And my wife answered the phone and said, excuse me, what are you talking about? She said, well, is this Jeffrey Epstein's house? Yes, it is. Well, Jeffrey Epstein is flying my boss out to Europe, and his plane's leaving from the airport. When's he leaving? My wife got very confused. She said, my husband doesn't have a plane. So it turns out that person knew both of us, and the assistant called the wrong Jeffrey Epstein. And my wife was very upset for a while. She thought, hey, Jeff, why don't talk to me, Jeff? You know, why don't you have a plane? And now she doesn't say that anymore. Now she's pretty happy with me. So
I'm sure your wife is very happy with who you are, and and you also
now,
have
for a while she would have liked a plane.
And you have beautiful kids and grandkids and etc. So yeah, thank you. It's a little bit dark humor there.
Yeah.
Right. Back to more serious things on career and leadership learnings. What would you say is your top career learnings, since we have other people in the audience that are wondering about, like, how to progress in their career, or maybe even consider, like, how to think about what's their next career move, etc.
Well, I've had a chance to think about this a lot, talking to my own children and talking to other young people as they think about their careers. And there's two things. One is an expansion of what I said before, which is you start off as a generalist, and then over time, you need to become a specialist. So when you're early in your career, companies say, or whoever's going to be the hiring manager, the employer is going to say, I just want to hire a talented person, and we'll teach them and they'll learn on the job. By the time you're late 20s or early 30s, people don't want to hire someone to learn. They want to hire people who've done it before. They want to hire people who can immediately be productive and they're hiring for experience in addition for potential. And so early in your career, the advice is try a lot of things. It's like going into a clothing store and trying things on for size, and you say, I like this style, I like this fit. And then at some point you say, well, this is what fits comfortably on me, and this is what I'm going to learn a lot about and become better at. And for many people who've gone to good schools, you're going to get a good job. So it's not a question, you're not going to be unemployed for a long time. It's really a question of what is the right career for you. And that idea that you have a long time, I've been working 40 years. So that's a pretty long time. So if you're going to be working 30 or 40 years, you can afford to spend your 20s trying a lot of different things, seeing what fits. Then by the time you're about 30, you should probably figure out, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Now I'm going to get really good at it. So imagine you decide you want to be a lawyer, you go to law school, you graduate law school when you're 30, let's say, and then you spend the next 10 years becoming a really good lawyer. So your 30s is becoming expert at your area. And then by the time you're 40, you're now at the top of your game. Now you're the partner at the law firm, or the partner at the bank, or the senior executive or CFO, whatever. And then you spend your 40s performing and contributing quite a bit after that. So if you have that kind of time frame and you're 25, you don't have to decide tomorrow what you're going to do for the next 30 years. You still have plenty of time. But by the time you're about 30, you should probably have figured it out. That's one way to think about a career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a good point that if we started as liberal arts or other social science major, etc., can explore and figure out what is best fit. And then, since you have been a CFO from 32 years old, what are your top leadership learnings, Jeff, based on your own experience and observations?
Well, I have two stories. One it comes from the American military, where they say, I think maybe it was General Patton, I think, said it first, tell people what to do, but not how to do it as a leader. And people will surprise you with how creative they are. And actually, Eisenhower said a manager, let's see, how did he say it? A manager gets people to do things, and a leader inspires people to want to do things. So it's one thing to just direct. If you're a leader, it's one thing to direct people, say, go do this. It's another thing to say, how do I inspire someone that they want to do it? So it's their motivation, not my motivation. And that's a big difference. As you get older and more experienced and you're leading people, you try to think about how can you recruit people and train them and inspire them so that you all share the same goals. And then you don't micromanage them. You don't tell them necessarily, if you've hired the right people, you align on the goals and you say, go off and do it, come back, we'll trust but verify. And I'll check in, see how things are going. And if there's problems, come back and tell me about it. And I'll try to help you overcome the problems. But in the meantime, I'm expecting you to get it done.
So it's really kind of think about inspiring people, and then figure out what is the thing that is needed, and then let them figure out the how part.
Yeah, agreeing on what are the goals so that everyone's goals are aligned, and then letting people figure out how to do it. And even if they don't do it as well as you, if you've been around 10 or 15 years and you're pretty good at your job, maybe you can do your subordinate's job better than they can.
Right.
But if you do it for them, then they'll never learn. So you have to let them try. It's like how the kid has to learn how to walk, and they have to fall down a few times before they walk. And so you need to let them fail in small ways so they learn to get better. And ultimately, if you hire the right people, they'll get better than you at it. And then you have a lot of leverage. Fundamentally, no company has 3 employees of any size. Every company has hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of employees. And so when you have a large organization, you need to recruit and train great people and let them perform and give them guidance, but not, you can't do everything. You as an individual can't do everything.
That's true. Yeah, at some point at Oracle, you had a team of 4,000 people reporting to you, right? Yeah.
Well, are you asking how many people I had reporting to me?
Yeah.
Well, everyone starts off being an individual contributor, and then early in my career, I would have a team of bankers reporting to me, maybe 2 or 3 people. At King World, I started out with 10 people and ended up probably with about, I would say, 100 people on my team. And then at Oracle, I had over 6,000 people reporting to me.
Wow. Yeah. And so among the people on your team, I assume some of them are like first-time managers or managers of first-time managers. What have you found that kind of first-time managers need to learn? What kind of pitfalls have you seen for themselves? And then if you're managing or leading first-time managers, how would you help them to learn how to be a good manager?
Well, the first thing is a manager is in charge of recruiting the right people. Secondly, putting the right people in the right jobs, and then setting goals, and then holding people accountable for achieving those goals, if you think about that sequentially. And so the first time managers probably often hire the wrong people. And they just learn that through trial and error because they don't have a clear idea of what the qualifications are, how to do it. And so if a senior executive can help the middle management learn how to hire and how to evaluate people early on, that probably, you can increase the success rate of hiring from 50% to 90%. That's phenomenal. You can do that. And then once you've hired the people, you have to make sure they're in the right position. So for instance, if let's say you hire someone and they don't work out and you have to fire them, that's your fault. You as the manager's fault. You either hired the wrong person or you gave them the wrong responsibility. So what could you learn from that? Why did you do that? And so doing lessons learned, every time you fire someone, a manager should say, where did I screw up? Why did I hire that person? Why did I put them in a position where they failed? And what can I learn from that so I don't do it again? And these are hard things to teach. A lot of it just comes from trying and failing and then doing it a little better next time. Right.
Yeah, that's a little bit hard because we do have quite a number of new managers and in the audience. So like the key is like figure out how to hire the right people, like learn from experience, but every time have self-reflections, learn to figure out what are the lessons, why something didn't work out as intended. Yeah,
exactly. I think from my point of view, what a first-time manager might say is you hire someone, they don't work out, you fire them and you say, well, they were just incompetent. And well, that may be true, but why did you hire them? You were incompetent to hire them and put them in that position of responsibility. So don't blame them. It's your fault as the manager. And so you don't want to do that twice. So what went wrong? Did you not interview them properly? Did you not check their references thoroughly? Did you not match their skills to the area's responsibility? Did you not understand what the job requirements were? Maybe because it's a job you haven't done personally.
Right.
So as an example, when let's say I had a team of 8 people reporting to me and someone leaves, one technique that I really liked was rather than replace that person right away, I would not replace that person. And I would have that person's direct reports report directly to me. So even though for a while I might have 15 direct reports because I have my direct reports and I have that one gap and there's people 2 levels down reporting to me, I would learn a lot about what that job was in that organization. And so then when I hired someone, I knew a lot better what were the requirements of that job because I had been doing that job for 3 months, let's say, because I was essentially managing 1 level down.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's a very good strategy. It's like kind of putting your time and effort to learn about a job and figure out like maybe the better hire. I mean,
the first time, if I can add another comment, which is, let's say you're an individual contributor and you're promoted to managing for the first time, and now you're managing a team of 3 people. Treat the job of a manager seriously. If you're an engineer or if you're a marketer or a finance person, whatever it is, as good as you need to be in engineering and marketing and finance, you need to be that good in leadership. And so there's a ton of stuff online, videos and books, you can read about it. The best way to do it is to find someone in your organization who you personally think is a great leader and just spend time with them and ask them how they do it. And maybe meet with them once a month and say, I'm having a challenge with one of these people that I'm working with on my team. They're not performing well. I'm struggling with it. And the senior leaders are generally very eager to help and willing to help.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Thank you. Yeah, learn from the support network and such. Emotions is also a platform to help everyone to learn the important skills such as leadership skills, communication skills. So it's also providing a channel for everyone to practice with the community or learn from leaders like yourself.
I probably could have used Emotions a few years ago when I was learning myself.
You're too modest. I mean, you did mention that you found the courses on interpersonal skills and leadership skills at Stanford Business School useful. Although at the time you graduated from Yale and went to business school, so maybe the learning was not maybe at the maximum. So since you have been working in leadership roles and for so many years, like what are the new thinkings since then that you have developed on these areas?
Well, Stanford Business School has a famous class that almost every student takes called touchy-feely, which is interpersonal dynamics. It's how people interact with each other. And of course, there's about 400 students in the first year class at Stanford Business School. So you have 70 people or so in your section, and you take all your classes the first quarter with same 70 people, so you get to know them pretty well. You often have study teams, you get to know them pretty well. And then you're taking this class with maybe 12 other people, touchy-feely. And some of them you've already known, and some of them you don't know, but you get to know during the class. So they start off the first few weeks, and they do these getting to know you exercises. And then one of the exercises is, you're all pre-COVID, you're all standing in a room together. And the assignment to you is Jeff, physically go over, everyone's standing up, take everyone in this room and put them in order, physically move them in the room in the order of who you feel closest to and who you feel most distant from. And you rank order them from 1 to 11 if there's 12 people in the class. And boy, is that shocking, because you have to make choices. You're required to just say, I think this person, I feel more aligned or closer to this person than that person. And the person who's 11 may think they're really close to you, and you think they're the most distant from you. And so you learn a lot, because there's a lot of miscommunication going on. And it's embarrassing and complicated, but people make these judgments all the time. They just don't talk about it. So you learn a lot in that class. Yeah.
That seems very interesting and also brutal in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting kind of experience and concept. So that kind of help with everyone knowing what other people might observe about one person, even though it might not verbalize in other environments, right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, we're hoping to create similar kind of safe environments through emotions for people to have this kind of interpersonal practice, etc., and for everyone to share their more honest feedback and thoughts. So yeah, that's certainly something to learn from. And curious, like, what do you think what are the important skills or practices you have learned over the years in your career in terms of leadership and learnings?
What processes have I learned?
Practices or
Practices.
Yeah.
Well, it's a lot of little things, and often I've learned by doing the wrong thing and then fixing it. So one thing I learned very vividly was I was in charge at one point in my career of a call center with about 300 employees in a different town, and in Houston, Texas. So I was living in New York and in charge of this call center, among other things. So I went out and I visited. I spent the day with the whole team, learning about what's going on. At the end of the day, the woman, Carol, who is the general manager, invited me into an office, into a conference room with her direct reports, and said, Jeff, tell us what your reactions of the day were. And I just said, well, here's what I thought was great, and here's where I thought we could improve. And these are my general reactions. And then I went off and I did some email, and Carol came into my office crying. And I go, oh, this isn't good. And I made someone on my team cry. So she said, Jeff, that was the most humiliating experience I've ever had in my professional career. You came in and you criticized me in front of my team. And I didn't even think I was criticizing her. I thought I was trying to be objective about, some things are going well, some things we could do better. And I didn't perceive it as being critical at all. And she said, Jeff, haven't you ever heard you're supposed to praise people in public and criticize in private? And I said, well, no, actually, no one ever told me that before, but now I'll always remember that. So that was a pretty important learning for me.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's very nice of you to share that real experience. So yeah, we should always remember, actually, as parents as well, praise in public and criticize in private. Yeah, thank you.
By the way, I just put in chat the name of the book, this touchy-feely class that I talked about at Stanford. The teachers of that class have written a book called Connect. Mm-hmm. So the book is in chat if you're interested.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, we're modeling some of our virtual sessions of this book, actually.
Oh, great.
So everyone can learn lessons from this. And speaking of being in like leadership roles and etc., how would you suggest a leader to think strategically? Because like, I mean, even individuals, everyone is a leader in some way in their own lives. Like, how would you suggest someone to think strategically and have the big picture?
For instance, in a business context,
Mm-hmm.
what I've always found is I try to imagine the future that I want. So if I'm at a company with $10 million of revenue, and I try to think out, let's say 3 to 5 years, because 3 to 5 years is enough time that you can make investments now that will pay off, but 10 years is a long time from now. So to me, it's sort of a 3 to 5 year planning period. And so I say, well, let's just say 4 years. So if we have 10 million of revenue now and we've got 100 employees, if things are going well and we're growing, how big do we think we could be in 4 years? Do we think we could be, 500 employees and 50 million of revenue, or could we be 100 million of revenue, whatever the number is? Just pick a number you think is reasonable and say, okay, well, if we're going to be there in 4 years, where do we have to be in 2 years? Where we're going to be in 3 years? We're going to be in 1 year, and sort of draw a line between now and then, and say, okay, well, that means that from now until next year, we're going to have to grow from 100 to 200 people. And these are venture-backed companies that are growing really fast. And in 4 years, we'll have 500 people, whatever. Well, at 500 people, if I have one product in just the US, can I still only have one product in just the US and be 5 times bigger in 4 years? Or do I have to have a second product? Or do I have to be in Europe? And then, okay, well, I probably have to have a second product. But when am I going to, if I have to have a second product and 30% of my revenues in 4 years are going to come from my second product, when do I have to start my second product? Well, I probably have to start it soon. I've got to start it like in the next 18 months, or else I'm not going to get big enough in the 4th year. Okay, well, I have to have people working on it now. I'm going to launch the product in 18 months. So you sort of start with the endpoint, set with some reasonable time frame, and then work your way backwards and say, what do I have to do? And then you have to realize, well, every new product I start is not going to work. So if I want one successful new product, I might have to start 2, because one will fail and one will work, or something like that. And so you think about that in terms of your team, in terms of your product, in terms of your sales, marketing, geographic distribution, customer segment, ideal customer profile.
Right.
And so that's that. When you talk about strategy, that's how I think about envisioning where you want to be in the future. What customers do you want? How are you going to serve them? Where the market's going to be. Yeah.
So envisioning like long-term where you want to be, and then what are the milestones that need to get there, and work backwards.
Right. And when you say often people say long-term, they mean 10 years. For me, it's the 3 to 5 year time frame is sort of the most relevant.
Right. And would that be the same kind of like envisioning, setting goals, working backward, apply to someone's career as well?
Yeah, I've always thought in that time frame that, there was never a time where I could see 10 years in the future in my career, and I was always doing something very different from what I thought. But I think 3 to 5 years, generally, you can get a sense of, are you going to be in the same job? You think you might be in a different job. You can think 1 or 2 steps ahead, and then you can try to meet people who are 3 to 5 years older than you, or 3 to 5 years further ahead in career than you, and say, well, if I'm in this particular function at this particular kind of company, who are people who had my job 4 years ago? What are they doing now? And if I meet 5 of those people, one of them has a great job and a great career, and one of them is in a dead end, and I don't want that. And so you can most of the time, people don't do something brand new that's never been done before. They're doing, chances are you're doing something that's similar to something that someone's done before. I spent 25 years as CFO, and I could look at hundreds of CFOs and see what they did. So it's, once I went first as an investment banker, I could see what a career like an investment banker was like. Once I became a CFO, I could see what a CFO career was like, and figure out which was right for me.
Yeah. So it's like learn from the giants before us, and kind of see what are the learnings that we can see from them.
Well, not only giants, certainly learning from giants, but learning just from regular people who just did a good job and made some good choices and have interesting jobs now.
Yeah. So yeah, we're learning from you right now on your Korean leadership learnings. And since you mentioned kind of the thinking about the companies and financial results, etc., what have you learned effective in helping companies to be in like good financial status? Know you have worked on very big public companies as well as advising startups and etc. as well.
So the question is, how, as a board member, have I helped companies think about growing in the future? Is that the question?
Board member or CFO, like thinking about how to make sure a company have good financial results long term.
Well, as a CFO, the job of a CFO is quite different from a board member. So as a CFO, the first job is integrity. You just want to make sure that everybody's being honest and nobody's cheating, stealing, things like that, which is sort of the basics. Then you want to be able to be effective and efficient. So you want to close the books on time, have the financials be accurate. You want make sure you have enough cash to run the business, and you want to do it with reasonably low cost and quickly. And then you want to be effective, meaning you'd like to be able to give the business people the data and the analysis they need to make good decisions. You'd like to raise capital when you need it, before you need, rather not wait until you need it, but raise it in advance before you need it. If you have investors, communicate with investors, under promise and over deliver. So there's a whole series of just, I would say, expertise, financial expertise that you would do as a CFO, running your department and being one of the players on the team. As a board member, you're now just not responsible for one department, you're fundamentally responsible for the whole organization. And so your most important job is hiring and firing the CEO, and then helping the CEO set the tone from a culture point of view and a strategy point of view, and helping with advice, because ultimately the CEO makes the decisions and the board helps guide those decisions or gives input into decisions, but fundamentally you defer to the CEO when unless it's a private equity controlled company, when the private equity partner makes the decisions. But typically in a public company, it's the CEO who's going to make the decisions. And there, what you want to do is try to say, well, back to what I said before, what's the value we're providing customers? How do we take our current product line and our current customers and grow and as quickly as we can, provide as much value as we can? And then you say, well, the hardest part is, if the extent that we're generating a lot of extra capital, do we give the capital?
你随便不冷就可以，冷不冷？我不知道。今天冷不冷？今天
Sorry.
Do we
Someone
give
got-
do we give the capital back to shareholders, or do we reinvest in the business? And if we reinvest in the business, how much risk do we want to take? Where do we want to invest? So the capital allocation decision becomes a very important decision for the CEO and the board. And historically, big profitable companies have generally, on average, done a very poor job of capital allocation. There's a one story after another of big profitable companies that have wonderful businesses, but then they go off and make terrible acquisitions or new products that fail. And then you look at a company like Amazon that's done a brilliant job of capital allocation and constantly coming up with new products and has done a wonderful job. It's just really exciting to see that.
Yeah. So kind of like think back to thinking about the customers and what values can you bring to the customers, and then also think about some of the business decisions related to that.
Right.
Yeah. You also teach a course on entrepreneurship and startups at Stanford. Besides what you just talked about, like what other advice do you have for entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs?
Well, the course is called the Lean Launchpad. It's the Lean Startup methodology created by Steve Blank and popularized by Eric Ries in the book, The Lean Startup. And what the class is teams of 4 or 5 graduate students, typically graduate students, apply as a team with an idea. And in 10 weeks, they are required to interview 100 potential customers and build multiple versions of their product. And typically 1 or 2 or 3 of the teams by the 10th week actually generate some revenue. And then every year, I'd say 2 of the teams on average go out to raise venture capital and start a business along the same lines. And so we're starting from the very beginning, just the idea stage. And I'd say the most important thing that I've seen is what the most successful teams start with a very small idea. And they end up with, you can end up with a big company, but they don't start with a big company. That a startup is very different from a big company. A big company executes a known process with known products and known customers, and a startup is searching for customers and searching for product market fit. So if you think about the companies that you know, Facebook, for instance, did not start with 1 billion users. Facebook started at Harvard, and all it was a way to look up people only at Harvard. You needed a harvard.edu email address to sign up.
Right.
And then within 2 weeks, you got 90% of Harvard students to sign up. And then the founder went to the Ivy League. And so for a few months, you could only use Facebook if you were an Ivy League student. And then he expanded to colleges. And I think for a year or two, you could only sign up if you were in colleges. And then for a couple of years, you could only sign up if you were in high school or college. I think it was maybe 4 years from the founding of Facebook before a non-high school or college student could even sign up for it. So you think about it, that's a long time. So even though he might have had a vision that one day everyone will use Facebook, he didn't start out that way. Airbnb started out as a way to rent an airbed in an apartment while someone was in the apartment. You know, so it was a very different product than what it is today. So, but they got product market fit, and then they built it from there. So that what we try to teach in this class is try to think of the smallest possible problem where you can solve the problem. You only need 10 people, 10 customers to get started, and then try to solve the problem for those 10 people. And if you can solve the problem for those 10 people, you could probably find 11 and then 12 and then grow from there.
Right.
But if you try to solve the problem for 1 million people, it's really hard to solve the problem for 1 million people at the same time.
Yes. Yeah, that's a very good point. That's a good segue. For the audience listening, please feel free to post on the chat what are your top goals or problems you're hoping to solve, and also if you have any questions for me, for PNPN, or for Jeff. So we're going to continue the conversation. Jeff, since you talked about earlier that you sometimes even take on the role of some of your direct reports and manage have 15 people on your team reporting to you at the same time, how would you suggest someone to handle reduce stress or work-life balance when you have a lot of responsibilities, big team, probably fast-moving roles?
Well, I made my own decisions early on that I wasn't going to work 100-hour weeks and work every weekend and have a complete focus on my job. I was married at age 26 and we had kids. And I ended up living in Connecticut, working in New York for many years. And so my life was basically working pretty long hours during the week and then very seldom on the weekends. And then when I took a vacation, I took a vacation and I turned off my computer and I put a message saying, I'll check your email next week when I get back. And my boss and a couple of other people had my phone number if I needed to be reached, but generally didn't work on vacations. And I think you need that time to just refresh and have a private life. And for me, family was number one, work was number two, and then everything else was after that. And when your kids are young and they want to be with you all the time, you have less time for everything. Now my kids are all grown, and I've got actually more time now than I did 20 years ago. So over the course of a career, you've got plenty of time for work-life balance. In any given week, you may not have very much balance, which is a challenge.
That's true. Sure, your grandkids probably keep you busy as well right now. Yeah, that's really excellent learning, having the family in mind and work in mind, and also taking time to refresh and make sure we have the energy to move on to the next.
What my kids are doing is they're working during the day, and then they always come home for dinner at night.
Yeah.
Pre-COVID, and then they'll go back. Then they'll work online at night after the kids are in bed.
That's
and that
right.
cycle seems to work well for them. Because I was commuting, I didn't actually get a chance to come home in time. If I got home at 8:30, the kids were already in bed.
Yeah. We have questions from Catherine in the audience. From a CFO's perspectives, one is the practice of acquiring small, nimble startup to by larger companies, and like how do you think about actually maybe both sides, like startups being acquired and also big company thinking about acquiring startups?
Well, I'll take it from the acquirer side first. When you have a big company, you have multiple products in multiple markets going after multiple customers, and you have a sense of your product roadmap. Here's where we are today. Here's where we want to be in 3 to 5 years. And you have two choices. You can either build those products yourself or enter those markets yourself, or you can acquire a company to do that. Or I guess there's another variation is you could partner with someone or do a joint venture or something, which is less common. So fundamentally, there's a build or buy strategy. And at Oracle, as an example, I would say half of all the new products we developed were built in-house, and roughly half of them were acquired. And of course, there's a lot more people out in the world who are not your employees than people who are your employees. So to think that you are going to have all the innovation in your category in-house is generally not true. Or generally, there's always a lot of innovation happening outside your company. And if you have a big company like Oracle, where you have 30,000 salespeople, the playbook that we ran very successfully is we would buy a company, let's say with 100 million of revenue with 100 salespeople, and we would buy the company and take the product and then give that product to our 30,000 salespeople, and they would sell a lot more of the same product because we had 300,000 customers all over the world. So maybe the company we acquired was only in the US, and maybe they only sold to mid-market companies, but we could take that company, we could perhaps add some features to the product to make it enterprise ready, and then we could take it internationally. And so we would actually we would buy the company. We wouldn't need all their finance and HR and back office people, so we could save money there. We could hire more engineers to make the product bigger and better and integrate it with our product line. And then we could give it to our sales team and keep their salespeople as product experts, but then have our sales team cross-sell it and generate a lot of revenue. And that we've done that. Oracle's probably made over 100 acquisitions and with probably over a 90% success rate. From the selling company's point of view, fundamentally the question, if you're the founder, is do you want to build a large independent company, or at some point do you want to sell and cash out? And some of that is personal. How do you feel comfortable? Do you feel comfortable running a large company? You think you have the talent for it? Part of it is, hey, I've made a lot of money. Why not just take some money off the table now to sell the company? Part of it's what your investors want if they've been in for 7 years and it's time for them to cash out. And I've had a whole range of things where sometimes the CEO says it's time to sell and we have an excellent sale. Sometimes I've been in one case where the CEO said, I'm worried about the future of this market. It's getting more competitive. I want to sell. The investors didn't want to sell. And so we had to have some tough decisions. We ended up selling the company because it was tough to keep the company if the CEO doesn't want to keep on working. We would have had to replace the CEO. And there are other times where the investors lose faith and they say, the company is not going to do well in the next few years. We need to sell it now while we can get a good price. Mm-hmm. So it's very specific facts and circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. We have a question from the audience from Jialiang about, I think in summary is how do you cultivate a high performing team while also keeping people happy in an organization?
How do you lead high performing teams while keeping people happy?
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like a conflict. It sounds like high performing teams are really happy. How do I think about that? Warren Buffett has a great, I've read a lot about what he's written and watched him, and he has an interesting concept, which is think about all the people you know at your company or at your school or whatever. Who do you admire most? And write down, literally do this. It's a good exercise. Write down the qualities of that person, why you admire them the most. And then think of the people, an individual who you know, who you admire the least, and write down the qualities of why you don't admire that person. And then separate from business, just in life, ask yourself, are these qualities of the person I admire things that I can do? I mean, if I wanted to become a concert pianist, I probably couldn't do it. I could work really hard, but I just don't have that talent. But I think if I wanted to have the qualities of integrity and accountability and the kinds of things friendliness, whatever the key qualities are of someone I admire, those are probably qualities that over time with a little practice I could learn. And the same thing is true in a leadership context. Think about the leaders you've known and write down, why do you think they're great leaders? And think about the leaders or bosses you've had who are, I see this question about tough or difficult boss, and think about why they're tough and difficult and why they're terrible bosses. And then say, well, okay, what can I learn from that? And try to adopt the qualities of the good leaders and avoid the qualities of the leaders you don't admire.
Mm-hmm. So it seems like it's pretty important to observe, but also think about like what are the learnings you can have from those based on your observations, right?
Yeah, you need to do two things. First, observe, and then evaluate. Mm-hmm. You need to have a point of view. I mean, if you look at 10 leaders and you can't tell who's good and who's bad, that's a problem. I mean, you probably have an emotional reaction of which leaders you admire, which ones you don't. And if not, just think about it. Talk to your friends. Say, take somebody out for a cup of coffee and say, hey, of these 10 different leaders in this company or this organization, who is the most effective? Who's the boss that we like the most? Who's the one who we want to, if they were all to leave and go to different companies, who's the one we would go with? If you're in the military and the officer says, let's charge up the hill to take that machine gun nest, who's the one who you're going to go with, and who's the one you're going to stay in the foxhole and not go with?
Mm-hmm. And would you suggest, after like observing and validating, adopting some of the things, the key traits you observe from them, and put it into your own practice?
Yeah, it's practice, and then if you have a friend, you can even talk about it and say, hey, I'm going to work on the quality of. I'm going to try to inspire the people around me. Not just tell them what to do, but to try to inspire them to share the same goals. And here are some techniques I'm going to use to try to do that. Let me try it out for a couple of months, and let's sit down and see how I'm doing.
So experiment is important as well. Yeah.
It's just like, it's like any other skill. It's like practicing the piano or learning how to ski or whatever. You don't sound very good at the beginning. When you ski, you fall down, and you just try it and you get better at it with practice.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah, practice and learn. And we have another question about career. Since you work at big companies as well as advising startups, etc. Someone asked, how do you compare on like career path in terms of going in a big company route, kind of progress in the career, or founding your own company? What kind of learnings would you get from one versus the other?
My observation is that some of the best founders, entrepreneurs, did not really have a choice of working for companies. They would have been terrible employees. John Oringer, the founder of Shutterstock, where I served on the board for 9 years, he was an engineer, went to graduate school of engineering, worked for a company for 1 day. And at the end of the day, he said, this is terrible, and he quit. And then he started his own company. And so he knew, he just knew that he would be a terrible employee and terrible follower. He was just not good in organizations. And he was a great entrepreneur, is a great entrepreneur. So part of it is just personality. If you have the personality where you can do either, and I probably am more the organization person, but I might, in another world, I could have been an entrepreneur. I have two criteria. The first is starting a company is hard. And if you do it, you're going to be spending a lot of hours, probably for many years. If you get outside investors, you can't just quit and leave your investors high and dry and your employees and things like that. So you're probably signing up for 5+ years. Ironically, the worst outcome is not failure. Let's say you start a company and you raise a little money and it fails after a year, you shut it down. That's one outcome. What if it's not a failure, but it's not really successful either? It's just sort of chugging along, and you've got up to 20 employees and you're got some revenue, but you're sort of break even. It's not really growing. You don't want to shut it down because you have to fire everybody. Now you could be stuck for 5 years in a dead end company. That's right. The downside. So I don't think you want to do that unless you really believe in the idea. So the companies that I've seen that did best, they were founders who had they had personal experience with a problem. So to use John Oranger again, he actually created a software product, and a small software product for just, he had 2 employees, whatever. And as part of that product, he needed to use images in his marketing. And he tried to license images, and he found it was very difficult to license images. He said, this is crazy. Why can't I just pay $10 and buy an image and use it everywhere in the world forever? Why do I have to go back every 3 months and renew the license or something? So he went out and he got a camera, and he took 100,000 images personally with his camera, and he created a site to sell images because he personally saw the problems that entrepreneurs had buying images from Getty Images and the incumbents. So he experienced the problem. He saw what he knew what the problem was. He knew what a good solution was, and he went out and he built a product to solve that problem. You know, Mark Zuckerberg saw the problem of people at Harvard have found it difficult to know each other online. They sort of would meet occasionally in person, but you couldn't say, well, who's the friend of my friend? Wouldn't that be cool to have a product? And he saw that he built the product for himself and his friends. So if you have an idea like that and you do it as a side project and you build it and you start getting traction, then you don't have to quit your job and start the company. You can actually start the company first, and only after it gets traction, quit your job and build that out. So I think that's generally a pretty good way to do it.
Yeah.
To be,
I mean, even with emotions, I started with my own struggles and pain points in my earlier career in terms of leading teams and communicating, figure out career paths, etc. So yeah, align with the story. Hopefully will make it helpful for everyone. So another question related to career. DJ asks if are there examples from your own career that when you have take a big risks or big turns?
Yes, I took. I always felt that I could get a job, so I never really thought I was taking such a big risk. That what's the worst that could happen is the company is not going to work out, and I'm going to lose my job, and I'll get another one. I was willing to take risks in my career, but they really weren't the kind of risks that people take when they leave one country and don't know anyone, don't speak the language, and go to another country. That's a big risk. Or if you lose a job and that's the only job you can get, and you may never get a job again. So I always had financial security in that way. What I did several times, the biggest turn, as I mentioned before, was my luck in getting hired as a CFO. I had never worked in a finance organization, so I had never worked for a CFO. I didn't really know what a CFO did every day. And I was an investment banker, and my client hired me. So they never would have hired me from a resume because I wasn't experienced, but because I had a relationship, they did hire me. And so that was the biggest turn, because once I was a CFO, then I was qualified for all these other CFO jobs. In terms of a risky move that was a big failure, at one point in my career, I was living in Connecticut. I wanted to work in the New York metropolitan area. I was looking for another private, fast-growing venture-backed company that would go public, where I could be the CFO and take them public. And it was at a time it must have been, I don't know, 15 or 18 years ago now, where the economy wasn't doing very well. There weren't that many companies growing. And I was introduced to a company that was in the video game business. It was in New York. It was backed by Goldman Sachs and another venture capital firm, so great investors. It was growing quickly. Even though I didn't really understand the product, I liked the founders and I liked the investors. And I said, well, I'll try it. And I actually wrote a check, and I personally bought stock in the company. And within about a year, I realized that the company had stopped growing. They had missed it. This was just before Zynga started, and we were selling pay-to-play games. You played for free for an hour, and then you had to pay $20 to buy the game online. And then Zynga came out with free games where you paid with it $1 or 50 cents or something to play within the game. And that whole category took over, and our category collapsed, and our company didn't change fast enough. And so after a year, I left, and ultimately the company went out of business. And so I lost all my money. That was not a very good decision. So the lesson learned there is I knew it wasn't a great opportunity when I joined, but it was the best opportunity I had at the time. And what I should have done is just had confidence to say, look, even if it takes me another 3 or 6 months to find something, I should just wait. And I just didn't want to wait any longer.
every experience, it's like some kind of learning opportunities for us. Yeah. Thank you. And earlier you shared a story of criticizing an employee in public, and you kind of like share with us that now we learn the lessons of praising people in public and criticizing private. Still, like, how would you suggest us to deliver, if there's any critical feedback, how would you deliver that kind of critical feedback either to colleagues or people on your team? And also if team members have requests, how would you balance their personal needs versus or in consideration with companies' needs?
Well, I think often asking questions and trying to understand why is more effective than giving opinions and just making statements. So let's say that you're the boss and you have subordinates and you think they're not succeeding. The first thing is you should make it clear what the goals are so that they know. It shouldn't be a surprise to them. If you made the goals clear and you're measuring and you have frequent check-ins and you're measuring with them whether or not they're achieving their goals, they should know they're not achieving their goals before you have to have a difficult conversation with them. If they don't even know they're not achieving their goals, then you have failed as a leader in clarifying what the expectations are. So what I like to do, for instance, there's something called OKRs, objectives and key results, which Google uses. But there's a lot of different ways of doing goals. So let's imagine you have a subordinate and you say, here are the 3 to 5 goals that I expect of you this quarter. So you set expectations. And then at the end of the quarter, you say, look, why don't you come in and tell me how you're doing? I'm not going to tell you, you tell me how you're doing with respect to these goals, and grade yourself and grade red, yellow, green. Like, this goal is green, we're doing great. This goal is red, it's not going so well. Sometimes it's very clear. If you're a salesperson, you made quota, you didn't make quota. If you're a finance person and your goal was to close the books in 10 days instead of 15 days, how long did it take to close the books? So try to quantify it whenever you can. And then if they come in and they say, well, it's red, 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 but the dog ate my homework and there's all these reasons of other people, I didn't succeed, but it was everyone else's fault. Then that's one thing. If they come in and they say, well, it was red, 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 here's why I failed, here's what I need to help next time, but next time it's going to be green, and they're asking for help, then you need to help them. And you just work through, are they meeting expectations? It's very simple. It's basically set expectations, and then at the end of some time period, say, are you meeting expectations? Are you exceeding expectations? You're not meeting expectations. And if you're doing a good job, they will know exactly where they are, and they will know what they have to do. And sometimes they just can't do it, and they can't do it either because they're not capable of doing it, or they're not trained for it, or they're not trying hard. And you have to understand, which of those 3 things is it?
Right. Yeah, that's a very good point about like asking questions and setting clear goals and etc. If someone is not trained or does not have the skills or capabilities in doing some of the things, what would you do in that case?
Well, it's very different if they don't have the skill versus the capability. If they don't have the skill, you train them. If they don't have the capability, it means even after you train them, they still can't do it. And so there's no point in training someone who you think is not capable. You have them in the wrong job. And so either they have to leave the company or they have to leave that job and do something else. Or sometimes the job is really a collection of 5 different sub jobs, and they're good at one and not good at another. And you just need to rejigger their overall job so they're good at the tasks they're good at. Right.
So thinking about like where their strengths are and maybe balance the team a little bit so that they can work on use their strengths.
Right.
Yeah. Checking on time, we're wrapping up soon. Did you have a few more minutes or you're good?
I do.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much. I think we have a few people in the audience that have liberal arts or humanities or social science training, and they're wondering, kind of thinking about careers in business or companies, like how would they get into finance or business, or what kind of degrees do they need to get? Do they need to get MBA or anything for that?
Well, I found the MBA very helpful for 2 reasons. One is if you go to one of the top schools, it's just a credential where for the rest of your career, people say, well, he must be smart. He went to Stanford, he went to Yale, things like that. So whether I'm smart or not isn't the question. The point is people realize that it's hard to get into these schools. So, so the credential in itself is important. The MBA curriculum teaches us some basic things like accounting and finance and marketing and leadership. And so it is very helpful in some skills, the same way that in any career or any function, whether it's sports or music, you know, if you're trying to learn how to play basketball, you need to learn how to dribble and shoot and pass and defend. So those skills are very helpful. But there, as I said before, there are many companies that are what I call them is academy companies, like Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, the big four accounting firms. They just spend a lot of time and money training early in your career. So if you can go there and get trained for the first 5 years of your career, that's incredibly valuable. Now, if you go to a small company, they don't have the training, then you have to sort of learn on your own. And so it's a lot harder there. You just have to find a boss who is a good leader and a good trainer and is willing to spend the time as an apprentice, sort of one-on-one training you.
Yeah, thank you. Last question. Since you have seen so many organizations and companies, like I heard this question a lot, people asking about how to get aligned, either in a startup among the leadership team members, founders, etc., or even at a bigger organization. Do you have any thoughts on this?
How to get aligned among the leadership team?
Yeah.
Well, I think you have to decide collectively what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. So an exercise that we used, DoubleClick, which was great, is we got the leadership together and we said, let's talk about everything we want to do over the next year. What are all your ideas for new products, new projects? And we had about 20 people and everybody had 10 ideas. So we had sort of 200 ideas. We wrote them all on a whiteboard. And then some of them were overlapping. So we narrowed it down to maybe 120 ideas. And then we said, look, we're not going to do all 120 of these. You know, we're only going to do 3. So let's talk about what the most important ones are and why. And then the people who had proposed the ideas would make a pitch for why their idea should be one of the top 3. And we all listened and then we all voted. And then at the end of the day, the CEO made the decision. And by spending the day once a year doing that prioritization, we ended up all agreeing that these were the top 3 priorities of the company. And the people who really liked idea number 51, who went into the meeting thinking that that should be one of the top 3, after talking to the other people and realizing that none of the other 19 leaders of the company thought that was a top 20, let alone a top 3, they felt better about it. So even though they really still liked their idea, they weren't angry that no one took their idea seriously because they had a chance to pitch their idea and some other ideas won. It was like a competitive, it was a Darwinian process of the best ideas won.
So kind of figure out which idea is the best and get everyone to be aligned among that idea. Yeah.
And then you need the concept that was famous at Apple, which is disagree but commit. So you tell people, oh yeah, I don't think those are the top 3. These are my top 3. But at the end of the day, once either everyone else agrees or the CEO makes a decision, then you say, okay, well, I'm going to commit. If you can't commit, you shouldn't be in the organization. So it's good to disagree. It's good to voice your disagreement. But then once the decision is made, you need to commit and work 100% to accomplish what the organization wants to accomplish.
Right. Disagree but commit. Yeah, part of that. Now,
actually, I think that's an Amazon leadership principle.
Yeah. Now with the remote working, I think everything is in the flux. I think you mentioned that you were in Connecticut and now you're in the Bay Area. One last audience questions. Someone asked about thinking about like locations, relocation. How is that part of the consideration in terms of seeking new job opportunities?
Well, there'll clearly be a lot more remote work in the future than there was in the last 10 years, where there'll be companies where there's no office and they just get together once a year or once a quarter.
Right.
And there'll be some companies that are in the office 2 or 3 days a week. The challenge for an individual is if there is a headquarters, but you are not at headquarters,
right,
you're going to miss out. And I had that experience. I was in the California office of the Boston Consulting Group and the headquarters in Boston. So I had a fine time there, but it was we didn't know a lot about what was going on,
Mhm.
and it would have been better if I had worked at the headquarters. So that's not even, and I was in the office every day. So even if you're not in the office, it's even worse. So if you have a choice and a company has a headquarters, I think there's a lot of value for you physically to be in the headquarters at least a few days a week, because just you get to know the people better, you build relationships. There's a lot of informal communication. You find out what's going on in the hallway and at lunch and dinners and stuff.
Yeah. So building relationship is still very important in the career.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for sharing all your insights and learnings. And thanks everyone for your active participation and listening in.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Great to see everybody.
Yeah, great to see everyone. Thank you.